She was dying on an operating table, giving birth to triplets, while her boyfriend celebrated with champagne at a rooftop party. 900,000 people watched him live, none knowing she had minutes to live. Then a stranger walked into that hospital, a billionaire, her ex from 7 years ago. And he did something that would shock the world. He married her while she was unconscious. But that emergency wedding certificate, it was just the beginning. Because when she woke up 3 days later, she discovered her boyfriend had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on her. He'd been betting on her death. If this story grabs you, smash that like button and drop a comment. You won't believe where this goes. Hit subscribe because the truth is wilder than any headline. Rain hammered the streets of Manhattan like bullets, and somewhere between 10th Avenue and Hell, Claire Thornton was dying. The ambulance screamed through traffic, its siren slicing the November darkness. Inside, Claire gripped the metal rail with white knuckles, her body convulsing with contractions that felt like lightning tearing through her chest. Blood soaked the sheets beneath her. The monitors screeched their warnings. BP dropping 80/50, the paramedic shouted, pressing an oxygen mask against her face. Ma'am, stay with me. For them. Claire tried to breathe, but her lungs wouldn't obey. Her heart, her treacherous, failing heart hammered irregularly inside her chest. 3 lives depended on that broken organ. 3 tiny heartbeats inside her swollen belly, fighting for their chance at the world. Call Blake, she gasped. Please, he needs to know. The paramedic glanced at his partner, then at the phone buzzing uselessly in Claire's purse. 17 missed calls, all ignored, because Blake Morrison wasn't in an ambulance racing toward the hospital. He was 3 miles away on a Tribeca rooftop, filming an Instagram live with a bottle of Dom Perignon in one hand and his phone in the other. Yo, what's up, everyone? Blake's face filled the screen, his perfect teeth gleaming under string lights. The party raged behind him, models dancing, champagne flowing, music pounding. Tonight's the night, baby, I'm about to be a dad to triplets. 3, can you believe that? The comments exploded. Bro, where's the mom? Dude, answer your phone, it keeps buzzing. This doesn't feel right. Blake silenced his phone without looking at it. She's at home resting, everything's chill. But me, I gotta celebrate, right? This is legendary status. He raised the bottle. The crowd cheered, glasses clinked, and 3 miles away, Claire's heart monitor flatlined. We're losing her. The paramedic slammed his fist against the ambulance wall. Drive faster. New York Presbyterian Hospital's emergency bay erupted in controlled chaos when the ambulance doors burst open. Nurses surrounded the gurney, shouting codes Claire couldn't understand, hands pressed against her abdomen. Someone was saying her name, but it sounded like it was coming from underwater. Through blurred vision, she saw her sister. Natalie, Claire's voice cracked. Natalie Thornton ran alongside the gurney, her blonde hair flying, mascara streaking down her face. I'm here. I'm right here. Blake's on his way. He promised. But even as she said it, Natalie's phone showed the truth. Blake's Instagram live, now at 400,000 views. Him laughing, him drinking, him celebrating while Claire bled out. Dr. Judith Warren appeared, silver hair pulled back, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd seen 30 years of impossible cases in this hospital. This was about to become another. Get her to or two, Dr. Warren barked, and someone find the father. We need consent for emergency intervention. He's not answering, Natalie sobbed. Then keep calling. They wheeled Claire through doors marked authorized personnel only. The ceiling lights became a strobe as they flew past. Claire's chest felt like it was caving in. Each breath was a battle she was losing. Dr. Warren leaned over her. Claire, listen to me. Your heart is failing. The pregnancy accelerated a condition called peripartum cardiomyopathy. If we don't deliver these babies right now, you'll die. But there's a device, an LVAD, that can keep you alive until we can get you a transplant. Do you understand? Claire tried to nod. Black spots danced across her vision. I need verbal consent for the device. Can you give that? Save them? Claire whispered. Whatever it takes, save my babies. We're going to save all of you. But even as Dr. Warren said it, Claire's body betrayed her. The first contraction hit like at a freight train, then another. The babies weren't waiting for permission. They were coming whether she survived or not. She's crowning, a nurse shouted. First baby presenting. We don't have time for anesthesia. Hold her down, Claire screamed as pain exploded through every nerve. The monitor's beeping accelerated into one long, terrible shriek. Then silence. We've lost her pulse. Start compressions. Hands slammed against Claire's chest. Once, twice, again, again. Natalie's screams echoed from the hallway where security had pulled her and, "Don't you dare leave them, Lesher Claire." And in that moment between life and death, while a team of doctors fought to restart her heart, while three babies struggled to enter a world that might not have a mother, while her sister sobbed helplessly in a sterile corridor, Blake Morrison raised his champagne bottle to the Manhattan skyline and shouted, "I'm going to name them after stars Miles, Eden, and Theo." Has a ring to it, right? 473,000 people watched him celebrate. None of them knew the woman he claimed to love was dying. At 2:37 in the morning, a black Mercedes S-Class pulled up under the hospital's emergency canopy. Rain drummed against its roof like urgent fingers. The driver's door opened, and Owen Hartley stepped out into the storm. He'd been in his penthouse overlooking Central Park when the news alert flashed across his laptop screen. Local nurse critical after emergency triplet birth. The photo was grainy, pulled from an old hospital badge, but he'd recognized her instantly. 7 years might as well have been 7 minutes. Some faces you never forget, especially when you're the one who walked away. Owen strode through the automatic doors, his Tom Ford suit already soaked, dark hair plastered to his forehead. Water dripped from his jaw as he approached the reception desk. "Claire Thornton," he said, voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "I need to see her." The night nurse looked up from her computer, exhausted. "Are you family?" He hesitated. What was he? Her ex-boyfriend from college. The man who'd chosen a startup over her 7 years ago. Who'd spent every year since building a tech empire while wondering what might have been. "I'm someone who needs to help. Only immediate family right now. Sir, I'm sorry." Owen pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Within 30 seconds, he'd transferred $50,000 to the hospital's cardiac research fund. "Check your system again." The nurse's eyes widened as the donation notification appeared. "Sir, that's very generous, but..." "Check again, please." Before she could respond, Natalie burst through the waiting room doors, phone clutched in her trembling hands. Her eyes were wild with panic and rage. "He's still not answering," she was saying to no one in particular. "He's still at that goddamn party? 700,000 people are watching him celebrate while she..." Her voice broke. Owen turned. "You're her sister." Natalie's head snapped up. "Who are you?" "Owen Hartley. I knew Claire in college. I just saw the news." "Is she being..." The word came out flat, defeated. "Her heart's giving out, and they need consent for some device that might save her. But they need a legal spouse or next of kin, and Blake won't pick up his phone because he's too busy being Instagram famous." "What device?" "An LVAD or something. It's experimental. But Blake has to sign because he's the father." Natalie's laugh was bitter. "The father who's 3 miles away playing superstar." Owen's jaw tightened. What if there was another way? There isn't. Unless you can make that selfish bastard answer his, "What if someone else signed?" Natalie stared at him. "You can't just sign someone else's medical consent." "No." Owen met her eyes. "But a spouse could..." The words hung in the antiseptic air between them. Down the hall, someone was coding. Alarms shrieked. Doctors shouted. Life and death played out their eternal war. "You haven't seen her in 7 years," Natalie whispered. "I know. You don't even know if she'd want this. I know she wants to live. I know she wants to meet her children." Owen's voice dropped. "I walked away from her once because I was a coward who thought money mattered more than love. I was wrong. I've been wrong every day since. So if I can fix one thing, if I can save her life, then maybe." "You can't marry someone who's unconscious. Emergency marriage laws in New York allow it if the person's life is at stake and they're unable to consent." And I looked it up in the car. He'd actually had his lawyer look it up, waking the poor man from sleep. But the answer had been clear. It was possible. Barely legal, ethically questionable, but possible. Natalie's hands shook. "This is insane." "Yes. She might hate you for it. Probably. Blake will destroy you in the media. Owen smiled without humor. Let him try. Dr. Warren appeared then, surgical mask hanging around her neck, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Natalie, I need an answer. If we don't place the LVAD in the next 8 minutes, your sister will die. The babies are in distress. I need consent now. I can give it, Owen said. Dr. Warren looked him up and down. And you are someone who can sign the papers. He turned to Natalie. If you trust me, if you think Claire would trust me, just for tonight, just long enough to save her life. The seconds stretched like hours. In an operating room down the hall, Claire's heart struggled to beat. 3 babies fought for breath. Everything hung on Natalie's next words. She closed her eyes, took a breath, opened them. The chapel's on the 3rd floor, she said quietly. We'll need a witness. Dr. Warren understood immediately. She'd seen stranger things in 30 years of emergency medicine. But this might top this list. Still, she nodded. I'll get a chaplain and someone from legal. If we're doing this, we're doing it by the book. The hospital chapel at 3 in the morning was a forgotten space, 6 wooden pews, a simple cross on the wall, and silence that felt heavy with old prayers. The janitor stood as witness, still holding his mop, looking confused but willing. A hospital attorney appeared with paperwork, checking boxes with mechanical efficiency. Owen stood at the makeshift altar, hands at his sides. His clothes were still damp. His hair was a mess. He looked nothing like the polished billionaire who graced magazine covers. He looked terrified. Do you, Owen James Hartley, take Claire Elizabeth Thornton as your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you understand that this marriage, while legal, is being conducted under emergency circumstances without the bride's conscious consent? I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the state of New York and under emergency medical statutes, I pronounce you husband and wife. The attorney stamped the papers. Sign here, here, and here. Owen's hands shook as he signed his name. The blue ink smudged slightly. He'd write a check for $10 million without blinking. But this signature felt like it weighed everything. Natalie signed as witness. The janitor signed. Dr. Warren signed. At 3:14 in the morning, Claire Thornton became Claire Hartley. She had no idea. Get her into surgery, Dr. Warren said, already moving. We have a signature. Let's save her life. Owen followed them to the surgical wing, watching through glass as they wheeled Claire's unconscious body into the operating theater. Natalie stood beside him, arms wrapped around herself. If she survives this, Natalie said quietly, you're going to have to tell her what you did. I know. She's going to be angry. I know. She might never forgive you. Owen pressed his palm against the glass, watching the surgical team work with desperate precision. As long as she's alive to be angry, I can live with that. Through the window, they could see the surgeon making the first incision, Dr. Warren calling out instructions, nurses moving with practiced efficiency, and Claire, small and pale on the table, fighting a battle she didn't know she'd already won in the strangest way possible. Owen pulled out his phone, looked at Blake's Instagram Live, now at 900,000 views. The party was still going. Blake was taking shots, laughing at comments, posing for selfies. He had no idea his entire world was about to change. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 32 minutes. Owen Hartley didn't move from his position at the observation window. Natalie brought him coffee he didn't drink. Nurses changed shifts around him. Somewhere outside, dawn broke over Manhattan, turning the sky from black to gray to that particular shade of blue that promises nothing. Inside operating room 2, Dr. Warren and her team performed what could only be called mechanical resurrection. The LVAD left ventricular assist device was roughly the size of a deck of cards. It attached to Claire's failing heart with titanium connectors and polymer tubes, a machine taking over what her body could no longer do alone. A battery pack would sit outside her body, connected by a thin cable through her abdomen. She'd carry it everywhere for the rest of her life, or until a donor heart became available, if she survived that long. Heart rhythm stabilizing, a nurse called out. LVAD synchronizing, another confirmed. Dr. Warren watched the monitors with the intensity of a conductor leading an orchestra through its most difficult passage. Claire's heartbeat, once erratic and failing, now moved in mechanical time. Artificial, precise, alive. We've got her, Dr. Warren breathed. The surgical team exhaled collectively, but there was no celebration. 3 babies still needed them. The delivery was brutal in its efficiency. Baby A, a boy, 4 pounds, 2 ounces came first, wailing his protest at the world. Baby B, a girl, 3 pounds, 14 ounces, followed 3 minutes later, silent until Dr. Warren cleared her airways and was rewarded with a furious cry. Baby C, another boy, 4 pounds even, arrived last, struggling to breathe until oxygen tubes coaxed his tiny lungs into cooperation. Miles, Eden, and Theo. Blake had named them on Instagram before they'd even drawn breath. Owen watched through the glass as nurses bundled the triplets into incubators, their impossibly small bodies barely visible beneath the warming lights and medical equipment. They looked like aliens, he thought, fragile and fierce and utterly, terrifyingly real. Claire remained unconscious. The anesthesia would keep her under for hours yet while her body processed the trauma of birth and machinery. Mr. Hartley, Dr. Warren emerged from the OR, surgical mask pulled down, exhaustion written across her face. Your wife made it through surgery. The LVAD is functioning as intended. But I need you to understand this isn't a cure. It's a bridge. She'll need constant monitoring, cardiac rehabilitation, and eventually a transplant. Your wife, the words felt surreal. But she'll live. If infection doesn't set in, if her body accepts the device, if she follows every protocol perfectly. Dr. Warren's eyes softened slightly. You did a brave thing tonight. A legally questionable thing, but brave. Will you tell her that when she wakes up and hates me? I'll tell her you saved her life when the man who got her pregnant couldn't be bothered to answer his phone. Owen glanced back through the window where Claire lay, pale and still, tubes and wires connecting her to a dozen machines. How long until she wakes? 6 to 8 hours. Maybe more. Her body's been through hell. Dr. Warren paused. You should go home, shower, eat. There's nothing you can do here. I'm staying. Mr. Hartley. I'm staying. Dr. Warren nodded slowly. She'd seen this before: the vigil keepers, the guilt carriers, the ones who couldn't leave until they knew for certain that life would continue. Then I'll have someone bring you a chair. Natalie appeared with fresh coffee and a change of clothes she'd grabbed from Owen's car. Security's dealing with the situation downstairs, she said quietly. You should know. Blake finally showed up, hungover, still has glitter in his hair from the party, demanding to see Claire and the babies, filming everything for his story. Owen's jaw clenched. Keep him away from them. Security's handling it. But Owen, Natalie hesitated. He's already spinning this. His Instagram says he rushed to the hospital the second he heard. His followers think he's a devoted father who's being kept from his family by hospital bureaucracy. Let me guess. He's not mentioning the 900,000 people who watched him party while she died. He deleted the live, said his account was hacked. Of course he did. Owen stood, muscles protesting from hours of stillness. I need to see them. The babies. The NICU was a chapel of its own kind, hushed voices, gentle beeping, the soft whoosh of ventilators breathing for lungs too new to remember how. 3 incubators sat in a row, each one containing a miracle wrapped in wires. A nurse smiled kindly at Owen. You can touch them through the ports. Just be gentle. Owen approached the first incubator. Miles, according to the card. The baby boy's eyes were closed, his tiny chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. Owen slipped his hand through the portal, barely daring to breathe, and let his finger rest against Miles's palm. The baby's fingers curled around his instantly. Something cracked open inside Owen's chest, something he'd kept carefully locked for 7 years. Since the day he'd told Claire he was choosing his startup over their relationship. Since he'd convinced himself that ambition mattered more than love. He'd built an empire since then. Made his first billion by 32. Been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, Bloomberg. He could buy anything in the world. Except time, except second chances, except this tiny finger holding his like an anchor. They're fighters, the nurse said softly. Just like their mother. Owen moved to Eden next, then Theo, letting each baby grip his finger in turn, making promises he didn't speak aloud. Protection, resources, whatever they needed, for however long they needed it. These children would never doubt they were wanted, Even if their mother woke up and hated him for what he'd done. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant, Blake Morrison, is live again. You need to see this. Owen pulled up the feed. Blake's face filled the screen. Tears streaming down his cheeks, real or rehearsed. Impossible to tell. They won't let me see my babies. Blake sobbed into the camera. Some billionaire swooped in and married Claire while she was unconscious. Can you believe that Owen Hartley, yeah, the tech guy, he's trying to steal my family? This is what rich people do. They think money can buy anything, even someone else's life. The comments exploded. That's so messed up. Sue him, bro. How is that even legal? Get your kids back. Owen closed the feed. Let Blake have his performance. The truth would come out eventually. It always did. He returned to Claire's recovery room and settled into the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. The LVAD hummed softly in her chest, a sound he'd have to get used to. Through the window, morning light spilled across Manhattan. The city was waking up to a story it didn't fully understand yet. I'm sorry, Owen whispered to Claire's unconscious form. I'm sorry I left you 7 years ago. I'm sorry for doing this without your permission. I'm sorry for every selfish choice I made. But I'm not sorry you're alive. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Claire's chest rose and fell. Somewhere down the hall, 3 babies slept. And in a Tribeca penthouse, Blake Morrison planned his next move, already calculating how to spin a miracle into his personal tragedy. Claire Thornton, no. Claire Hartley now, though she didn't know it yet, opened her eyes 36 hours after her world ended and began again. The first thing she felt was the hum, a strange mechanical vibration in her chest, like her heart had learned to speak a language made of gears and electricity. It terrified her. The second thing she felt was pain, not the sharp, tearing agony of labor, but a deep, whole-body ache that suggested she'd been hit by a truck and reassembled incorrectly. The third thing she saw was Natalie's face, hovering above her like a guardian angel with mascara-streaked cheeks. You're awake, Natalie breathed. Oh God, you're actually awake. Claire tried to speak, but her throat was sandpaper. Natalie held a cup with a straw to her lips. The water tasted like mercy. The babies. Claire's voice cracked on the words. Alive. All 3. Perfect. Natalie's smile was fierce with relief. Miles, Eden, and Theo. They're in the NICU, but they're strong. Just like you. Claire's hand moved to her chest, felt the unfamiliar bulk beneath her hospital gown. What is this? There's a lot to explain. Natalie, what is this? Before her sister could answer, Dr. Warren entered, tablet in hand, professional mask firmly in place. Claire, welcome back. How are you feeling? Like I died. You almost did. Multiple times. Dr. Warren sat in the chair beside the bed. Your heart was in failure. Peripartum cardiomyopathy. Accelerated by the triplet pregnancy. We had to place an LVAD, a left ventricular assist device. It's essentially a mechanical pump that's helping your heart function until we can get you on the transplant list. Claire stared at her. A machine is keeping me alive. Yes. For how long? Indefinitely. Some patients live with LVADs 4 years while waiting for a donor heart. Some never need the transplant. The device gives their heart time to heal. Dr. Warren's voice softened. You're alive, Claire. You get to watch your children grow up. That's what matters. Claire closed her eyes, felt the hum in her chest, imagined her body as part human, part machine, something in between. I want to see them. Soon, when you're stronger. Right now, your body needs rest. Where's Blake? The room went silent. Claire opened her eyes to see Natalie and Dr. Warren exchange a glance that spoke volumes. Natalie started with, he's been calling. Security has him on a restricted visitor list right now. Why, Mom? Claire, there's something you need to know, something we need to tell you before you see anyone else or read anything online. Natalie pulled out her phone with obvious reluctance. Blake was at a party when you went into labor. He didn't answer his phone. Not once, Visana. She turned the screen toward Claire. It showed Blake at a rooftop bar, champagne raised, smiling into the camera. The timestamp read 11:43 p.m., exactly when Claire had been coding in the ambulance. Claire stared at the image. felt something cold settle in her stomach. How many views? Her voice was flat. Claire, how many people watched him celebrate while I died? Natalie's silence was answer enough. Dr. Warren cleared her throat. Because Blake wasn't available to give consent for your emergency surgery, we had to find an alternative. The hospital required a legal spouse signature for the LVAD procedure. Your sister made a difficult choice. What choice? The door opened before anyone could answer. Owen Hartley stepped inside, coffee in hand, looking like he hadn't slept in 2 days, which he hadn't. His eyes found Claire's immediately. She knew that face. Older now, sharper around the edges, but unmistakably the boy she'd loved at Columbia, the one who'd broken her heart by choosing Silicon Valley over her, the ghost she'd spent 7 years trying to forget. Owen. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Hi, Claire. What are you doing here? Owen looked at Natalie, then Dr. Warren, then back to Claire. I married you 2 nights ago in the hospital chapel so I could sign the consent forms that saved your life. The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire laughed. It was a broken, disbelieving sound. That's not funny. It's not a joke. Owen pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket, unfolded it carefully, held it where she could see. Marriage certificate, State of New York. Owen James Hartley and Claire Elizabeth Thornton, dated 3 days ago, 3:14 a.m. I was unconscious, Claire whispered. Yes. You married me without my permission. Yes. That's not legal. It can't be emergency marriage statutes, Owen said quietly. When someone's life is at stake and they're unable to consent, it's rarely used, but it's legal. I have lawyers who checked every detail, and I'll get you an annulment the second you want one. But you needed that LVAD to survive, and Blake wasn't answering his phone. And I was there. He stopped, took a breath. I'm sorry, Inoy. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I'm not sorry you're alive. Claire felt the world tilt. The hum in her chest seemed to grow louder. Get out. Mushy Claire, get out. Owen nodded slowly to Shanum, set the marriage certificate on the bedside table. I'll be in the waiting room if you need anything at all. He paused at the door. I'm sorry for a lot of things, Claire, but not for this. When he left, Claire turned to Natalie. Tell me everything, every detail. Now. So Natalie did. The whole impossible story, Blake's party, the ignored calls, Owen's sudden appearance, the desperate chapel ceremony at 3 a.m. By the time she finished, Claire's hands were shaking. He saved your life, Natalie said softly. I know it's crazy and wrong and complicated, but Owen saved your life when Blake couldn't be bothered to answer his phone. I'm married to someone I haven't seen in 7 years. On paper, just on paper. My whole life just became a headline. As if on cue, Natalie's phone buzzed with a notification. Her face went pale as she read it. What? Claire demanded. TMZ, the story broke. Natalie turned the screen. The headline screamed, Billionaire marries dying woman in midnight hospital ceremony. Baby daddy left out in the cold. Claire closed her eyes, felt the mechanical hum in her chest, felt the weight of tubes and wires tethering her to life, felt the impossible reality of her new existence, part human, part machine, newly married to a ghost from her past, mother to 3 babies she hadn't met yet, betrayed by the man she'd trusted. I want to see my children, she said quietly. Then I want to sleep. Then I want everyone to leave me alone while I figure out what the hell my life is now. Claire, please, Nat, just, please, Natalie squeezed her hand. Okay, I'll arrange a NICU visit, but you should know Blake is planning a press conference. His manager leaked that he's going to fight for custody. Claire laughed again. That same broken sound. Of course he is, because this nightmare wasn't complete yet. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The LVAD hummed its mechanical song, and somewhere in the city, Blake Morrison practiced his tearful speech about stolen fatherhood, while Owen Hartley sat in a waiting room chair, wondering if saving someone's life could ever make up for breaking their heart 7 years before. Outside, the first news vans pulled up to the hospital. The story was just beginning. The wheelchair was humiliating. Claire had survived cardiac failure, emergency surgery, and the insertion of a machine into her chest. She'd given birth to 3 babies while technically dead, but the wheelchair, the helpless, visible proof of her fragility felt like defeat. Hospital policy, the nurse said cheerfully, pushing her down the corridor toward the NICU. Everyone gets the ride. Natalie walked beside them, phone buzzing constantly with notifications she was ignoring. Owen had stayed away, true to his word, haunting the waiting room like an expensive ghost. The NICU smelled of antiseptic and hope. Soft beeping filled the air. Nurses moved between incubators with practiced quiet. Claire's heart, her half-mechanical heart, stuttered when she saw them. 3 tiny humans in 3 separate plastic boxes. Miles with his shock of dark hair, Eden with her delicate features, Theo with his determined frown. Even in sleep, they were impossibly small, impossibly perfect, impossibly hers. You can touch them through the ports, a nurse said gently. They know your voice. Talk to them. Claire wheeled herself closer to the first incubator. Miles. The name felt foreign in her mouth, Blake's choice. Made for Instagram likes rather than love. But this baby didn't know that. He just knew he was alive, fighting to breathe, waiting for something he didn't have words for yet. Hi, Claire whispered, slipping her hand through the port. Hi, sweetheart. I'm your mom. I'm sorry I'm late. Miles's tiny fingers wrapped around her pinky with surprising strength. The touch broke something open inside of her. She'd spent 2 days learning she was married to a stranger, that the father of her children had abandoned her, that her heart was now more machine than muscle. But this tiny grip felt like the only real thing in the world. She moved to Eden next, then Theo, whispering the same introduction to each. I'm your mom. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Behind her, Natalie's phone rang. She stepped out to answer it. Voice low and urgent. Claire was alone with her children for the first time. The LVAD hummed in her chest. The babies breathed with mechanical assistance. They were all cyborgs together. She thought, all of them kept alive by machines and stubbornness. We're going to figure this out, she told them. I don't know how yet, but we will. You're stuck with me. Natalie returned, face grim. That was a reporter from Page 6. They want to comment about the marriage, about Blake's custody plans. She stopped. About what? There's a GoFundMe. Blake's manager set it up. Help Blake fight for his kids. It's raised over $100,000 in 3 hours. Claire closed her eyes. Of course Blake had turned their tragedy into crowdfunding. She could see it so clearly now, every Instagram post, every tearful video, every carefully crafted piece of his victim narrative. He wasn't mourning or panicking. He was building a brand. I want to see it, Claire said. Claire, you should rest. Show me. Natalie pulled up the GoFundMe page. Blake's face filled the screen. Eyes red-rimmed, wearing the gray hoodie he knew made him look vulnerable. The description was a masterpiece of manipulation. I'm Blake Morrison, father of triplets, Miles, Eden, and Theo. While my girlfriend was in the hospital, a billionaire took advantage of her vulnerable state and married her without her knowledge. Now he's using his money and lawyers to keep me from my children. I'm just a regular guy trying to protect my family from someone who thinks everything is for sale. Please help me fight for my kids. The comments were predictably outraged. Calls to boycott Owen's companies, demands for justice, conspiracy theories about rich people trafficking babies. Blake had weaponized their sympathy perfectly. He's a genius, Claire said flatly. An absolute genius. He abandons me while I'm dying. But somehow I'm the villain's accessory, and he's the hero fighting against the system. People will figure it out, Natalie said. The truth always comes out. Does it? Or does whoever tells the best story win? Before Natalie could answer, shouting erupted from the hallway. Security guards surrounded someone trying to force his way toward the NICU. Blake Morrison, still wearing last night's clothes, glitter still visible in his hair, phone in hand, filming everything. Let me see my kids, he shouted. You can't keep a father from his children. This is illegal. Claire's blood pressure spiked. The monitors started beeping faster. A nurse appeared immediately, checking her vitals with concern. You need to stay calm, the nurse said. Your heart can't handle stress right now. But Blake's voice carried through the walls. I have rights. Those are my babies. That billionaire can't just buy my family. Owen appeared then, moving past the commotion with the quiet authority of someone used to getting his way. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. He simply positioned himself between Blake and the NICU door. Leave, Owen said. One word. Flat. Final. Who the hell do you think you are? Blake shoved his phone in Owen's face. Still filming. America needs to see this. Owen Hartley, billionaire bully, keeping a father from... You were at a party. Owen's voice was ice. You were drinking champagne and taking shots while she coded on an operating table. 900,000 people watched you celebrate her death. That's a lie. My account was, I have the footage, downloaded before you could delete it, timestamps, comments, everything. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this hospital. You're going to stop pretending you're a victim, and you're going to pray that Claire has more mercy than you deserve. Blake's face twisted. You think your money makes you better than me? No, but being here makes me better than you. Signing the papers that saved her life makes me better than you. Not celebrating while she died makes me better than you. Owen stepped closer, voice dropping. You turned her tragedy into content. You're selling t-shirts with your kids' names on them. Yes, I saw that too. So go ahead and film this. Tell your followers whatever story makes you feel important. But those children in there, they're under my protection now. Touch them and I'll bury you. Security moved in, escorting Blake backward. He was still shouting, still filming, but his voice faded down the corridor until silence returned. Owen stood at the NICU door for a long moment, shoulders rigid. Then he turned and saw Claire through the window, watching him. Their eyes met. She should hate him for the marriage, for the presumption, for everything. But in that moment, she felt something else entirely, something that terrified her more than the LVAD ever could. Gratitude. Owen nodded once and walked away, leaving her with her babies and her complicated, impossible new reality. In the incubators, Miles, Eden, and Theo slept peacefully, unaware their lives had just become a trending topic. 3 weeks passed in a blur of hospital rooms, legal meetings, and carefully worded press statements. Claire grew stronger, her body learning to work with the LVAD rather than against it. The triplets graduated from incubators to bassinets. Small victories measured in ounces gained and oxygen tubes removed. But outside the hospital walls, war had been declared. Blake filed for full custody on grounds that Claire was medically unfit and under the influence of a manipulative billionaire. His lawyer was a young shark in a cheap suit, working pro bono for the publicity. The court date was set for April 15th. Tax day, appropriate, Claire thought, since everyone wanted their piece of her life. Owen had moved Claire and the babies into a private recovery suite at the hospital, his donation, his influence, his money opening doors she could never have accessed alone. She hated being dependent on him, hated that the marriage certificate was real, even if the relationship wasn't, hated that sometimes. Late at night, when the LVAD hummed its mechanical lullaby, she'd find herself grateful he'd stayed. You can't go to court, Dr. Warren said during a checkup. Your body isn't ready for that kind of stress. I have to, Claire said. If I don't show up, Blake wins by default. If you collapse in the courtroom, he wins anyway. Dr. Warren's voice softened. Let your lawyer handle it. That's what they're for. But Claire knew better. This wasn't about law. It was about narrative. And Blake was writing the story faster than she could read it. His Instagram had exploded 2 million followers now. Every post was a carefully crafted scene of fatherly devotion. Blake visiting toy stores, buying matching outfits, showing off a nursery he'd set up in his apartment. Never mind that he'd never actually met the babies. Never mind that hospital security had banned him after the NICU incident. In the court of public opinion, Blake Morrison was Father of the Year, tragically separated from his children. Owen's companies faced boycott threats. Protesters showed up at Hartley Systems headquarters with signs reading, "Babies aren't for sale," and "Justice for Blake." The stock price dipped 3%. His board of directors were not pleased. You could end this, Natalie said one evening, watching Claire feed Eden with a bottle. Tell your story, do an interview, show people what really happened, and say what my husband, who I didn't consent to marry, saved my life while my boyfriend partied. That makes me sound helpless. You're not helpless. You're a survivor. That's not what the headlines will say. Claire adjusted Eden in her arms, careful of the LVD cables. Blake's narrative is simple: rich man steals poor man's family. My narrative is complicated. People don't like complicated. So you're just going to let him win. I'm going to show up in court, present the facts, hope the judge sees through his performance. Claire looked down at Eden's tiny face. And if that doesn't work, I'll figure out plan B. The court date arrived with cruel spring weather, cold rain that felt personal. Claire wore a navy dress that hid her LVAD equipment, though the battery pack was visible on her belt. Natalie pushed her wheelchair up the courthouse ramp while photographers shouted questions. Claire, are you happy in your marriage? Claire, will you give Blake another chance? Claire, is it true Owen offered you money to stay quiet? She kept her eyes forward, said nothing. Let them interpret her silence however they wanted. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Less dramatic. Wood paneling and fluorescent lights and a flag hanging slightly crooked behind the judge's bench. Blake sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a suit that actually fit for once, his hair styled, his expression practiced, sorrowful. He didn't look at her. Owen sat behind Claire's legal team, present but not participating. They'd agreed he wouldn't testify unless absolutely necessary. His involvement complicated things. The judge entered an older woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human nonsense. She looked at the paperwork with obvious distaste. This is highly irregular, Judge Patricia Reynolds said. Both parties need to understand that I'm not here to litigate Instagram drama or sort out your personal choices. I'm here to determine what's in the best interest of 3 infants. Is that clear, Mom? Yes, Your Honor. Both lawyers said. Blake's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, my client is a devoted father who's been systematically excluded from his children's lives. Ms. Thornton, sorry. Mrs. Hartley entered into a questionable marriage with a billionaire while unconscious. Mr. Morrison believes this was done specifically to cut him out of his parental rights. Objection, Claire's lawyer said. Mr. Morrison had every opportunity to be present during the medical emergency. He chose to attend a party instead. Alleged party. Not alleged. Claire's lawyer, Gwen Bishop, 50-something, ruthless. Owen's recommendation pulled out a laptop. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit A into evidence. A video posted to Instagram Live by Mr. Morrison on the night of the triplets' birth. The courtroom screen lit up. Blake's face appeared. Champagne raised. Music pounding. The timestamp was visible, 11:43 p.m. I'm about to be a dad to triplets, Video Blake shouted. This is legendary. Real Blake shifted in his seat. This video was broadcast live while Ms. Thornton was in cardiac arrest. Gwen continued. 900,000 people watched Mr. Morrison celebrate. Meanwhile, hospital staff tried calling him 17 times. He ignored every call. I didn't see, you silenced your phone on camera, Mr. Morrison. The footage shows you doing it. The judge's expression could have frozen nitrogen. Continue. Gwen pulled up more evidence. Blake's deleted posts about triplet dad energy. His merchandise sales, actual t-shirts with Miles Eden Theo Morrison printed on them. His GoFundMe page. Bank records showing he'd sold baby photos to tabloids for $83,000. Mr. Morrison didn't want to be a father. Gwen said, he wanted to be famous. And when Miss Thornton's near death became national news, he saw his opportunity. Blake's lawyer scrambled. My client was in shock. He made poor choices. Yes, but he loves his children. He's never met his children. Gwen interrupted. Hospital security banned him after he tried to force his way into the NICU while filming for Instagram. Every interaction with these babies has been documented for social media. That's not love. That's exploitation. Judge Reynolds leaned back. Mr. Morrison, stand up. Blake stood, putting on his humble face. How much money have you made from your children's birth? I don't. A number, please. Blake glanced at his lawyer. Including merchandise and donations, around $200,000. The courtroom went silent. And how much of that have you spent on childcare, diapers, and medical equipment? I was saving it for when I got custody. So 0. Your Honor, I was kept from them. By your own choices. Judge Reynolds looked at Claire. Mrs. Hartley, you don't need to testify unless you want to. Claire stood slowly, Natalie steadying her. I want to. Then speak. Claire looked at Blake for the first time since entering the courtroom. You promised you'd be there. When I found out I was pregnant. When the doctor said my heart couldn't handle it. When everyone told me to terminate, you said we'd be a family. You said you'd changed. Her voice didn't shake. The LVAD hummed steadily. But when I needed you most, you chose your image over my life. And now you're here, in a borrowed suit, playing the victim because that's what gets views. You don't want our children. You want the story they represent. And I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure they never become content for your brand. Blake's mask slipped. Just for a second, Claire saw real anger flash across his face. Then he smoothed it away. Back to wounded father. Too late. The judge had seen it too. Ruling, Judge Reynolds said. Full custody to Claire Hartley, Mr. Morrison. You'll have supervised visitation rights after completing a psychological evaluation and parent classes. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Blake stood frozen. His lawyer was already packing up. Clearly done with this case. Claire sank back into the wheelchair, exhausted but victorious. Natalie squeezed her shoulder. Owen smiled slightly from his seat. They'd won. But as they left the courthouse, Claire saw Blake on the steps, already filming a tearful video for his followers, already spinning the loss into martyrdom, already writing the next chapter of his victim story. This wasn't over. Not really. It was just intermission. Peace lasted exactly 2 weeks. Claire moved into Owen's Tribeca penthouse, a temporary arrangement. They both insisted, just until she was strong enough to find her own place. The apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, 3 guest bedrooms converted into a nursery, and enough space that they could avoid each other when things got awkward, which was often. I'll take the night shift. Owen would say, you don't have to. Claire would respond, I know, but I'm awake anyway. And he was. Claire would wake at 3 a.m. for feedings and find him already in the nursery, Theo cradled in his arms, humming something that might have been a lullaby. He was gentle with the babies in a way that surprised her. Careful. Present. Nothing like the ambitious boy who'd left her 7 years ago to chase his Silicon Valley dreams. The LVAD was her constant companion now. Battery changes every 8 hours. Careful showers with the equipment wrapped in plastic. No swimming, no contact sports, no forgetting for even a moment that she was part machine. But she was adapting. The human body was remarkable that way. Give it a new reality and it would learn to call it normal. Natalie visited daily, bringing groceries and gossip from the outside world. Blake's Instagram engagement was falling. People were getting bored with his victim narrative. He'd started a podcast about fathers' rights that nobody was listening to. His merchandise sales had collapsed. Reality was reasserting itself. He'll give up eventually, Natalie said over coffee one morning. Find some other way to be relevant. Claire wanted to believe her, wanted to think the custody ruling had ended things. But she knew Blake too well. He didn't give up. He doubled down. The call came on a Wednesday. Mrs. Hartley, the voice was professional, clipped. This is Detective Frank Russo with NYPD. We need to speak with you about Blake Morrison. Claire's stomach dropped. What did he do? Actually, ma'am, we need to speak with you about what he attempted to do, ma'am. Can you come to the precinct? An hour later, Claire sat in a gray interrogation room that smelled of burnt coffee and old desperation. Detective Russo, mid-40s, tired eyes, sat across from her with a folder thick with papers. We've been building a case against Mr. Morrison for several weeks, Russo said. Started with a HIPAA violation. Someone in the hospital sold your medical photos to tabloids. We traced the payments back to an account connected to Blake's manager, Amber Riggs. She's cooperating now in exchange for a plea deal. Okay, Claire said slowly. That's good. That's not why you're here. Russo opened the folder, pulled out a document, slid it across the table. Do you recognize this? It was an insurance policy. Beneficiary Blake Morrison, insured Claire Thornton. Value $2 million. Date issued 5 months ago. Claire stared at it. I didn't sign this. No, Blake did. He forged your signature and purchased a life insurance policy on you without your knowledge. The company verified that the signature doesn't match your actual signature on file. The room tilted slightly. He took out life insurance on me. While you were pregnant with triplets, high-risk pregnancy, he knew your heart condition. He knew the odds. Russo's voice was flat, but his eyes held sympathy. Mrs. Hartley, do you understand what I'm telling you? Claire understood. Understood with a clarity that made her stomach heave. Blake hadn't been careless, hadn't been selfish or stupid or overwhelmed. He'd been calculating. He'd been counting on her dying, had made her death profitable. She stood too quickly, knocking the chair backward. I need air, I can't. Russo guided her to a chair by the window. Breathe, take your time. But time was the problem. Time and trust, and the fact that she'd loved someone capable of this, had carried his children, had believed him when he said he'd changed. What happens now, Claire asked when she could speak again. We're preparing charges, insurance fraud, forgery, potentially attempted murder, depending on what the DA thinks they can prove. He wanted me to die. Yes, so he could get money and custody. That appears to have been his plan. Claire laughed. It was a horrible sound, sharp and broken. And I almost made it so easy for him. I almost died right on schedule. But you didn't? Owen's voice came from the doorway. He must have followed her here. Must have been waiting. You survived, and now he faces consequences. Claire looked at him, this man who'd married her without permission, who'd saved her life, who'd stood between her and Blake's manipulation without asking for anything in return. Did you know? Not until yesterday. Detective Russo contacted my legal team. I wanted to tell you, but you thought I'd been through enough. Claire wiped her eyes. I have been through enough. But apparently the universe isn't done yet. Russo cleared his throat. There's one more thing. We found communications between Blake and Amber discussing contingency plans. If you survived, what kind of contingency plans? Ways to stress you, public confrontations, legal battles, media campaigns. They knew stress could trigger LVAD complications. Russo paused, choosing words carefully. They were trying to finish what the birth started. The room went very quiet. Claire felt the LVAD hum in her chest, felt each mechanical beat of her rebuilt heart, felt the weight of knowing that someone had tried, was still trying to kill her. I want him arrested, she said. Today, now, I want him to know that I know, that everyone knows. We're executing the warrant this afternoon, Russo said. He'll be taken into custody. Bail will be high. Make it astronomical, Owen said. I'll testify. I'll provide whatever resources you need. Claire stood, steadier now. When he's arrested, I want to be there. I want to look him in the eye. I want to see his face when he realizes I survived in spite of him. When he realizes he bet on the wrong person. Russo looked at Owen, who nodded. Then we'll make it happen. 3 hours later, Blake Morrison was arrested at his apartment. The cameras captured it all, his shock, his protests, his lawyer scrambling, but they also captured Claire standing across the street, flanked by Owen and Natalie, watching with the calm expression of someone who'd already died and come back stronger. Blake saw her as they loaded him into the police car. Their eyes met through the window. Claire placed her hand over her heart, over the LVAD that hummed there, mechanical and unstoppable. She smiled. Blake looked away first. That night, the story broke nationwide. Not Blake's version, the truth, insurance policies and forged signatures, and a man who'd turned murder into a business plan. Claire fed the triplets their midnight bottles, the LVAD humming its steady rhythm, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. It happened 3 days after Blake's arrest. Claire woke up with fire in her chest. The LVAD site where the cables entered her body was hot to the touch, red, swollen. She knew infection when she saw it, knew it with the same instinct that had made her a good ICU nurse before pregnancy had derailed her career. Owen, she called, voice thin. He appeared in her bedroom doorway immediately, hair messy from sleep, took one look at her face and grabbed his phone. We're going to the hospital, now. The ER team moved with controlled urgency. blood cultures, IV antibiotics, urgent pages to Dr. Warren. Claire lay on the examination table, feeling the infection spreading like poison through her bloodstream, and thought with bizarre clarity, this is how I die. Not during childbirth, not from Blake's schemes, but from my own body betraying me. Her white blood cell count is through the roof, a resident said. Temp 104.3 and climbing. Dr. Warren arrived still wearing her yoga clothes. Having rushed from home, she examined the LVAD site with gentle fingers, her expression growing grimmer. The infection is tracking along the cable, she said quietly to Owen. If it reaches the pump, what happens if it reaches the pump? We remove the LVAD, and she goes on the transplant list immediately. If a heart isn't available within hours, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Claire closed her eyes, felt her half-mechanical heart struggling, felt the infection burning, felt tired in a way that went beyond exhaustion into something approaching surrender. I'm taking her into surgery, Dr. Warren said. We need to debride the infected tissue and flush the site. Owen, you should... I'm staying. This could take hours. Then I'll be here for hours. Claire wanted to tell him to leave, that he'd done enough, that he didn't owe her anything just because he'd signed a paper in a chapel at 3 a.m. But the words wouldn't come. She was too tired, too sick, too scared. They wheeled her toward the operating room. The ceiling tiles passed in strobing succession, just like the night she'd given birth. History repeating, the universe with a terrible sense of humor. Claire? Owen's voice pulled her back. He was walking beside the gurney, one hand on the rail. You're going to be fine. You don't know that? Yes, I do. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived cardiac failure. You survived childbirth. You survived Blake. You're going to survive this too. What if I don't want to? The words escaped before she could stop them. What if I'm tired of surviving? Owen stopped walking. The orderlies pushed the gurney forward, but he stood there in the corridor, and Claire saw something break behind his eyes. Then he was running, catching up, leaning over the rail. Then survive anyway. For Miles, Eden, and Theo. For Natalie. For everyone who fought to keep you alive. He paused. For me. Why do you care? Claire whispered. After 7 years, why do you care so much? Because I never stopped. Owen said, although I told myself I was choosing my career, my ambition, my future. But the truth is I was just scared. Scared of how much I loved you. Scared I'd fail you. So I left first before you could leave me. His hand covered hers on the rail. And I've regretted it every day since. So no, you don't get to give up now. Not when I finally have a chance to do this right. The doors to surgery swung open. An anesthesiologist appeared with a syringe. This is propofol, she said gently. You'll feel sleepy. Then, wait, Claire grabbed Owen's hand. If I don't make it, you will. But if I don't, promise me you'll tell them. Tell Miles, Eden, and Theo that I wanted them. That I chose them even when it was killing me. That they were wanted. You'll tell them yourself, Owen said. When they're old enough to understand. The medication hit her bloodstream. The world went soft and blurry. Owen's face was the last thing she saw before darkness took her. The surgery lasted 6 hours. They removed a section of infected tissue, flushed the LVAD cables with antibiotics, replaced the dressing with military-grade silver-impregnated bandages. Dr. Warren worked with the precision of someone performing bomb disposal, knowing one wrong move could kill her patient. Owen waited in the surgical waiting room. Natalie joined him around hour 3, bringing coffee he didn't drink. She'd arranged emergency childcare for the triplets, a night nurse. Carefully vetted. The babies were safe. Now they could only wait. She's going to hate you for staying, Natalie said. I know. She's going to tell you that you don't owe her anything. I know that too. Do you? Because Claire's spent her whole life being abandoned. Her parents, her ex-boyfriends, Blake, everyone leaves eventually. So if you're going to stick around, you better mean it. Because if you leave again after this, after everything, Natalie's voice cracked, it'll destroy her. Owen looked at her. I'm not leaving. Everyone says that. I'm not everyone. And I learned my lesson the hard way. He set down his untouched coffee. 7 years ago, I chose wrong. I thought money and success would fill the space she left. They didn't. Nothing did. So when I saw that news alert, when I recognized her face, he stopped, started again. I'm not leaving. Not this time. Not ever. Yeah, Dr. Warren emerged at hour 6, surgical mask pulled down, exhaustion written across every line of her face. We got it, she said. The infection. We got it. She'll need IV antibiotics for 2 weeks and monitoring for complications. But she smiled slightly. She's alive, still alive. Owen's knees went weak with relief. Natalie was crying. Dr. Warren sat down heavily beside them. She asked about dying, Warren said quietly. In the OR, before the anesthesia took effect, she asked what we should do if she didn't make it. What did you say? Owen asked. I said I wasn't planning on finding out. Warren looked at him. You're in love with her. It wasn't a question. Yes. Does she know? Probably not. She thinks I'm atoning for leaving her 7 years ago. Aren't you? Owen considered. That's part of it, but mostly I'm just trying not to lose her twice. Then you should tell her, because that woman in there, she's been betrayed by everyone she trusted. She needs to know someone's not leaving. They let Owen in first. Claire was pale against the pillows, wires and tubes connecting her to machines that beeped their mechanical concern. But she was breathing. She was alive. Her eyes opened when he sat down. You're still here, she said, voice rough from intubation. Told you I would be. The babies. Fine, Natalie arranged care. Miles spit up on the night nurse. Eden slept through the night. Theo has decided he hates every pacifier in existence. Claire smiled faintly. That's my boy. They sat in silence for a moment. The LVAD hummed steadily, still working, still keeping her alive. Owen, Claire said, why are you really here? He could have deflected, could have mentioned the marriage certificate, or obligation, or guilt, could have hidden behind any number of comfortable lies. Instead, he told her the truth. Because 7 years ago I made the worst mistake of my life, and I've been looking for a way to fix it ever since. Because when I saw your face on that news alert, something in me broke open. Because I stood in that hospital chapel and made vows I meant, even if you weren't conscious to hear them. He met her eyes. Because I love you, Claire. I never stopped. And I know this is the worst possible timing, and you have every right to hate me for the marriage and for leaving in the first place. But you asked why I'm here, and that's why. I'm here because I love you. Claire stared at him. The machines beeped. The LVAD hummed. Outside, dawn was breaking over Manhattan. You're an idiot, she finally said. I know. You don't owe me this. You don't owe me anything. This isn't about owing. Then what is it about my second chance, Owen said. For both of us. Claire closed her eyes, felt the tears slip down her cheeks. I can't promise anything. I don't know what I feel. I don't know if I'll ever be able to separate the man who saved me from the boy who left me. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking for a chance to prove I'm not that boy anymore. And if I can't give you that, then I'll be here anyway. As your friend, as the idiot who married you in a chapel at 3 a.m., as whatever you need me to be. Claire opened her eyes, looked at him, really looked for the first time since waking up in this nightmare. Saw the exhaustion, the fear, the hope he was trying to hide. Okay, son, she whispered. Okay, up to go. Okay to second chances. Okay to figuring this out. Okay to, she paused, to not pushing you away just because I'm scared. Owen took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV. I can work with okay. Good, because that's all I've got right now. Then okay is enough. Outside, the city woke up. The triplets stirred in their cribs. Blake Morrison sat in a jail cell, facing federal charges. And in a hospital room overlooking the Hudson River, two people who'd been broken separately started the long work of healing together. Spring turned to summer. Claire's infection healed. The triplets grew impossibly fast. Miles learned to smile. Eden discovered her hands. Theo decided sleeping was optional. They moved through the days in a rhythm of feedings and laundry and tiny milestones that felt enormous. Claire and Owen circled each other carefully, learning the map of their new relationship. He gave her space. She gave him chances. Slowly, like ice melting, The walls between them came down, but Blake's trial loomed. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was brutalist architecture, all concrete and sharp angles, designed to intimidate. Claire climbed the steps in August heat, wearing a simple black dress that hid her LVAD equipment. Natalie walked beside her. Owen stayed a step behind, present but not possessive. The media circus was predictable, cameras everywhere. Reporters shouting questions. Blake's remaining followers holding signs, innocent until proven guilty, and free Blake. Their numbers were smaller now. Hard to defend a man facing insurance fraud and attempted murder charges. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Claire sat in the first row behind the prosecution table. Blake sat across the aisle, wearing an orange jumpsuit because bail had been denied. He looked smaller than she remembered. Prison had hollowed him out. He glanced at her once. She stared back, expressionless. He looked away first. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution built their case methodically. Insurance documents with forged signatures. Expert testimony on the forgery. Bank records showing Blake's financial desperation before Claire's pregnancy. Emails between Blake and Amber discussing contingency plans if Claire survived. Amber testified for the prosecution her plea deal meant 5 years instead of 15. She was blunt about Blake's calculation. He said triplets were high risk, Amber told the jury. He said her heart condition meant the odds were good she wouldn't make it. He said the insurance payout plus custody of the kids would set him up for life. Content gold, he called it. Blake's lawyer tried to paint him as overwhelmed, making bad decisions under stress, but the evidence was too solid. The jury saw through the performance. Claire gave her victim impact statement on the trial's final day. She walked to the stand without help, wanting the jury to see her strength, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Blake's lawyer tried to break her. Isn't it true you were angry with Mr. Morrison for ending your relationship? He didn't end it. He abandoned me while I was dying. Isn't it true you married Mr. Hartley specifically to cut Mr. Morrison out of his children's lives? I married Owen Hartley because I needed an LVAD to survive, and Blake was too busy celebrating to answer his phone. Isn't it true that Blake took out a $2 million insurance policy on me and hoped I'd die? Claire's voice was steady. Yes, that's very true. The forged signature proves it. The timeline proves it. Blake's own words in those emails prove it. He didn't want to be a father. He wanted to be a widower. There's a difference where the courtroom was silent. The prosecutor stood. Mrs. Hartley, can you explain to the jury what it feels like to know someone bet on your death? Claire took a breath. It feels like being erased, like your life was just math to someone, profit and loss. He didn't see me as human, just as an opportunity. She looked at Blake. But I'm still here. I survived in spite of him, and now my children will grow up knowing their mother chose life, even when it was hard, even when someone wanted her dead. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Blake showed no emotion as the verdict was read. His lawyer filed immediate appeals. The sentencing was set for September. Claire felt nothing watching him led away in handcuffs. Not relief, not vindication, just exhaustion and the strange lightness of knowing it was finally over. Outside, reporters swarmed. Claire raised her hand. I have a statement, she said. Then I'm done talking about this. The cameras focused, microphones pressed forward. Blake Morrison tried to profit from my death. He failed. The justice system worked. Now I'm going home to my children, who will grow up knowing that when someone tried to destroy their mother, she fought back and won. That's the story. That's the ending. Everything else is just noise. She turned and walked down the courthouse steps. Owen fell into step beside her. Natalie took her other side. They formed a wall against the questions, against the cameras, against everything. A car waited at the curb. They climbed in. The door shut, muffling the chaos outside. Claire leaned back against the seat, closed her eyes, felt the LVAD hum its mechanical heartbeat. It's really over, Natalie said. The legal part, Claire agreed. Now comes the hard part. What's the hard part? Claire opened her eyes, looked at Owen, figuring out what normal looks like. Owen smiled slightly. I'm told normal is overrated. Good, because we're definitely not going to be normal. They drove through Manhattan traffic. heading toward Tribeca and home. Behind them, Blake Morrison faced 15 years in federal prison. Ahead of them, three babies waited with a night nurse, ready for feeding and stories and the ordinary miracles of survival. It wasn't the ending anyone would have written, but it was theirs. 6 months later, Claire stood at the window of Owen's penthouse, their penthouse now. If she was being honest, watching snow fall over the Hudson River, November again, the anniversary of the night everything broke and rebuilt. Behind her, controlled chaos reigned. Miles was attempting to crawl. Eden was laughing at her reflection, and Theo was staging a protest against his high chair. Natalie refereed while Owen tried to convince Theo that sweet potatoes were not, in fact, a war crime. He has opinions, Owen said, wiping orange puree from his hair. He gets that from me, Claire said, not turning from the window. The LVAD still hummed in her chest. Would probably hum there for years. She'd been on the transplant list for 8 months now. Might wait years more. Some days that terrified her. Most days, she'd learned to live with it. Her phone buzzed. A news alert, Blake Morrison sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. She deleted it without reading more. That chapter was closed. Hey. Owen appeared beside her. Theo balanced on his hip. You okay, remembering? The hospital? Everything? She touched the window glass, cold under her fingers. A year ago, I thought I was dying. Thought my story was ending. And now I don't know what the story is. Just that it's not over. She looked at him. We should get married. Owen blinked. We are married. Really married? The kind where I'm conscious and get to say yes. Claire, I'm not asking because I'm grateful, or because you saved me, or because it's convenient for the kids. I'm asking because, she paused, finding the words, because you stayed, through the affections and the trial and the 3 a.m. feedings and every hard thing. You stayed when you didn't have to. When I pushed you away. When I was too scared to trust anyone. You just stayed. Of course I stayed. That's not of course to me. That's everything. And Owen shifted Theo to his other hip. Are you proposing to me? I'm saying I want this to be real. Not just legal, but real spiritual. I want vows I choose. A marriage I consent to. A life we build together. Not one we fell into because of emergency paperwork. So you're proposing? Claire laughed. I guess I am. Is that okay? Owen set Theo down in his playpen, turned to face Claire fully. Ask me properly. Owen Hartley, will you marry me again for real this time? He pretended to consider. Can I think about it? She shoved his shoulder. You're the worst. And yet you're proposing anyway. He pulled her close, careful of her LVD equipment, like he always was. Yes, obviously yes. I'll marry you as many times as you want. Just twice, once more should do it. They stood there, foreheads touching, while the babies played and Natalie took photos she'd show at their real wedding. Outside, snow covered the city like forgiveness. Inside, the LVAD hummed its mechanical heartbeat, and Claire thought about survival and second chances and the strange grace of being loved after being broken. The wedding happened on New Year's Eve at City Hall, small and quiet. Natalie as witness, Dr. Warren in attendance, crying happy tears. The babies in matching outfits, causing chaos. No media, no cameras, just the people who mattered. Do you, Claire Elizabeth Thornton Hartley, take Owen James Hartley to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. And she meant it this time. Meant it with everything. Do you, Owen James Hartley, take Claire Elizabeth Thornton Hartley to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Again. Still. Always. Then by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you still married. Congratulations on making it official. Everyone laughed. They kissed. The babies made noise. It was perfect and chaotic and exactly right. Later, at the reception dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown, Dr. Warren gave a toast. To Claire, she said, raising her glass, who taught me that sometimes the heart needs help, but the will to live, that's all human. To Owen, Natalie added, who proved that second chances are worth the risk. To all of us, Claire said, standing with Owen's arm around her waist, their children sleeping in travel cribs nearby. for surviving the impossible and finding each other on the other side. They drank. They laughed. They told stories about the night in the chapel at 3 a.m., about Blake's trial, about Miles's first smile and Eden's first laugh, and Theo's ongoing war against vegetables. Later, much later, when the babies were finally asleep and Natalie had gone home and the penthouse was quiet, Claire and Owen stood at the window again, watching the city welcome a new year with fireworks over the harbor. "What do you think happens now?" Claire asked. "Now we live," Owen said. "Boring, normal, ordinary living. Doctor's appointments and preschool applications and arguments about whose turn it is to change diapers. Sounds terrible. Sounds perfect." Claire leaned against him, feeling the LVAD hum in time with his heartbeat. Two hearts beating one flesh, one machine, both stubborn. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For marrying me when I couldn't say yes, for staying when I pushed you away, for loving me even when I was too scared to love you back." "That's not something you thank someone for," Owen said. "That's just love, real love, the kind that stays." Midnight came. The city erupted in celebration. Fireworks painted the sky in gold and silver. And in a penthouse overlooking the Hudson, two people who'd survived impossible things kissed like it was their first time and their millionth time and every time in between. Because love wasn't about perfect circumstances or easy choices. It was about showing up, about staying, about choosing each other again and again, even when, especially when the world tried to break you. Claire had been broken. Her heart had failed. Her trust had shattered. Her life had collapsed. But she'd been rebuilt part human, part machine, all stubborn survival. And now, looking at Owen's face in the firework light, holding the marriage certificate they'd both signed this time, she understood something she hadn't known before. Survival wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Miles stirred in his crib, then Eden, then Theo, because Theo hated being left out. The babies woke into the new year crying for attention. Claire and Owen looked at each other, laughed, went to soothe their children, and the LVAD hummed on. Mechanical, steady, alive, just like her.